If last week didn't give you the thrill of college football, I don't know what will. The Connor Wegman news, the Grayson McCall news, and then obviously the poor outcome for Grayson McCall. But you know what? I actually rode that wave, and I wasn't mad about it. Welcome back to the College Football Show, everybody. My name is Bill. Put $1 in front of it, and you'll find me on Discord and Twitter. And we're here for another round of College Football DFS. Right back at it, even after the crazy week last week with the Vandy upset. I mean, that's the Diego Pavia effect. Like, maybe Diego Pavia is just a new Jaden Daniels. If he's on the slate, you play him. It doesn't matter what the matchup is. But we're ready for week 7, and we're ready for you to subscribe to the SHIPIT Nation YouTube channel. We're on the push to 10K. We have some big things planned for 10,000. We're right in that mid 8,000s right now. I actually think Tambo said we might have a little surprise at 9,000 too. Don't quote me on that. But 10K is a big number, and I think it's achievable. You might think you're subscribed because you get all of the notifications, but just double check underneath. If it says subscribe, then just click it. If it says subscribed with a D, then you're good. That's really all it comes down to. But we're going to get into the college football slate today. As far as DraftKings goes, they have the big midseason contest. It's 100,000 to first, but that's 1/3 of the prize pool. And then 10th place is 1/100th of first. So again, you could have the nuts line up and lose out on $99,000. And that's no fun for anybody. I mean, if you want to chase a big prize, go for it. It's just not the best. It's like it's a negative EV contest. The big $6 a little bit better this week, but again, the money's made. Like, the best structured contests are the single entries. Obviously, the cash contests are good, and then those small dollar 20 maxes are usually good. But the best contest on DraftKings is a Touchdown Hoedown Listener League, a rake-free contest. We got to fill it. It is a little bit smaller than it was last week because we didn't quite get it filled. But the faster we fill it, the more we can grow it, the more we can get a lot more degenerates just like us to play college football. And again, get some better contests for the rest of us on DraftKings. That's just all we really want. There's still plenty of room in it. So go jump in. I guess depending on when you're watching this, I shouldn't speak too soon, but if there's still space, get in it. It's rake free. You're not paying anybody except the people playing. And as you can see last week, congratulations to Oracle, one of our SHIPIT Nation members. Took down first and second. That's honestly stellar lineup. 207 points is crazy. Look at the drop off from first to second. SHIPIT Nation taking down the podium, first, second, and third. Look at that. And as you can see, this is me. I'm a cash player. I'm still donating to this contest every week. So that's 5 lineups you can get out of your way right away. So no problem there. Just jump in the contest, rake free. You don't get that in college football anywhere else except here at SHIPIT. But let's get right into it. We got a 12-game slate, a little bit smaller than last week. So I'm not going to get as out of breath as I did for week 6. But we're starting off with what I think is going to be a fun game to watch one side of the ball. I think Alabama is upset after last week. I mean, why wouldn't you be? I think they're going to beat the brakes off of South Carolina. That's just a gut feel. Obviously, the Vegas spread shows that they might as well. But on the South Carolina side, it's hard to like any of this with a 14.5-point team total. Rocket Sanders still splitting time with Attaway and Juju in the backfield. The one thing is, like, Jared Brown is hurt, so you're going to get really cheap wide receivers. And Gage Larvadane, that transfer from Miami of Ohio, did see a lot more usage last week. He had 7 targets. Nick Harbor finally had 5 targets, but he only had 3 catches for 16 yards. So there's not really a whole lot to love here. I mean, if there's one thing I will say, like, Alabama can be had. They're one of the best teams in college football, but there is room. But I don't know that South Carolina on the road in Tuscaloosa is going to be able to do it. On the other hand, Jalen Milroe could have been 12K this week, and I would have considered him. Again, the bounce back, the anger, and they're just – South Carolina just happens to be in the crosshairs. It's not their fault. They had to play Alabama after the week they lost to Vandy, which I should check to see if those goalposts are still in the river. Anyway, Jam Miller, Justice Haynes – split backfield. I don't know if you could play either of them in this spot, but you could probably play both of them in this spot. That's kind of just how it is. And then Ryan Williams is still the number 1 guy, but Jeremy Bernard, certainly better than 4,800. So I don't mind stacking a couple of these Alabama guys. But like Jalen Milroe is the leading rusher on the team as far as, attempts have gone recently. He might actually be the leading rusher on the team, period. And there's a couple injuries in the wide receiver room, but that's just probably going to funnel more usage to Williams and Bernard. but you're really just looking at the Alabama side here. Another game that's set up to be a blowout, Clemson at Wake Forest. Everything's, coming up Clemson lately. Ever since they lost to Georgia, Cade Klubnik has turned into a real quarterback. He's expensive, but, in this matchup with a 40.5-point team total, a very positive matchup. Same thing for Phil Maffa. He's kind of he honestly at this price tag and this matchup looks like a first guy in sort of guy to me. Very playable in all formats. Antonio Williams still isn't priced up enough. They're like nickel and diming his price up a little bit every week, but 5K it's just still too cheap for him. It doesn't make any sense. And Brian Wesco, he's a freshman. He's starting to come out of his shell a little bit more. 13 targets the last 2 games. Don't mind that. Don't mind Brenning Stool. But after that, it kind of drops off a little bit. Tyler Brown's kind of disappeared, which is weird. But don't mind a Clemson stack here either. Like Klubnik and one of his wide receivers, Phil Maffa, is just in a great spot. But then Wake Forest, pretty successful game last week. Just saying. I mean, they did get a lot of FU chants from that NC State crowd, but they looked fine. Like Claiborne is. I never like a running back in such a negative EV, but they will score points. It's just a matter of where you think it's going to come from. Their wide receivers are cheap. Deuce Alexander at 3,500, Horatio Fields under 4,000. Like they're both in good spots. And Donovan Green is expected to be out again. We'll know for sure on Saturday, obviously. But Hank Bachmeier is cheaper than he was last week. He didn't do great last week. He didn't do awful. But even though they're projected to get beat pretty badly, 20 points is still a decent total, and they're at home. So we saw weird things happen at Vanderbilt last week. I don't know why it couldn't happen to Clemson this week. I mean, weird stuff happens. And Clemson hasn't been tested a ton since that Georgia game. But really just looking at the Clemson side. And the next game is a lot more enticing. Georgia Tech and North Carolina, 6-point spread. Georgia Tech with a 32.5-point team total. We know where the usage is going to go here. It's going to be Haynes King. He's going to run the ball a lot. Jamal Haynes finally had a bust-out game. It'd been a little slow for Jamal Haynes this year, but he had 19 carries for 128 yards last game against Duke. This is a very positive matchup for him. I'm not scared of that North Carolina run defense. And then we know the usage is going to Rutherford and Singleton. They're still too cheap, this wide receiver core. So it's really just those 4 guys that I'm looking at. And honestly, I don't mind all 4 of them in any format, just because that's where all the usage is funneled. It's been that way almost the entire season. You're going to get a one-off touchdown from somebody like Chase Lane or Avery Boyd. That's going to happen. It's inevitable in college football, but those 4 guys are really what I'm looking at. And then on the North Carolina side, it's kind of weird. Omarion Hampton at almost 9K. We know his floor is there, but does he have the upside to pay off a $9,000 price tag? That's what you got to ask yourself. You don't have to pay that much more for somebody like Desmond Reed. You're getting that's $2,400 more than Phil Maffa in the last game we talked about. So you're looking at point per dollar here, and 8,900 is tough. Obviously, he's a good player, one of the best running backs in college football. But what does it do to the rest of your lineup, and is the upside there? Is really what you have to ask yourself. And then Criswell, fine, mid-price. Don't love it, don't hate it, but it's got to go somewhere. They have a decent team total. This is projected to be a semi-close game, and North Carolina's at home. JJ Jones still a top guy, but Nate McCullum resurrected last week. I don't know where that came from, but I wonder if he was banged up and just finally got healthy. Bryson Nesbitt, probably the best option at 3,500 for the amount of usage he gets. Really looking more at these Georgia Tech guys. Really only going to North Carolina if I'm stacking this game. And again, it's like Hampton's the top option. It's just the price. And then to a game that should probably take about 45 seconds to get through. Washington at Iowa, very low team totals. Iowa at home, one of the just sloggiest teams in college football. On the Washington side, Will Rogers is just kind of there. He's a game manager. Even in DFS terms, he's kind of a game manager. That's honestly a good way to describe him. Jonah Coleman gets a ton of usage out of the backfield. I don't mind it here. 6,300 is a little bit steep considering the rest of the running back value on this slate. And then, it's like there's value on the slate, but then there's a couple of studs that you're really looking at. And Jonah Coleman kind of falls in that middle weird ground. But I don't mind these wide receivers, actually. Boston and Jackson still the top dogs. Kaliki Latu, the tight end, 3,100, had 8 targets last game. And then Jeremiah Hunter had 6 targets the game before. Now, we've seen Iowa. They're not the same defense they have been in years past. They've given up big games to wide receivers. Jeremiah Smith last week. Devontae Ross from Troy had 5 catches for 142 yards. Daniel Jackson from Minnesota had 9 for 112. So, there is opportunity for these receivers there. I do like Jackson and Latu just because of the price discount you get from Boston, but it could be a Boston game too. It's not out of the question somebody has a ceiling game against Iowa. And then Iowa, the big white tight end that it used to be, they would funnel up. That's tight end university. Leachy just hasn't had it yet this year. It's not to say that he won't, but Caleb Johnson's really the only guy you're looking at. He's where all of the usage goes. He's why they win games on offense anyway. But that's really all I'm looking at on the Iowa side. Wisconsin and Rutgers would be the sloggiest game, if not for the game before it. Wisconsin blew the doors off of Purdue last week. I think everybody kind of expected that. Braden Locke, like I said, he didn't look that bad when they played USC, and he looked like a stud against Purdue. And now he's cheaper. It's just a matter of matchup. This is going to be a very slow game. Rutgers at home is going to try to slow it down as much as they can. 5,200 is super cheap, though. Tawi Walker did it for us last week. He had the touchdown variance. Still not too expensive. 5,300 is a great price. I love Tawi in this spot too. And Rutgers, low-key, has kind of had some guys run the ball on them. Even Akron averaged 6.1 yards per carry. The only team that didn't run the ball well on them is Nebraska. And that was the week everybody was on Dowdle, so that's probably why they didn't run the ball well. He did luck sack into a touchdown later in that game, but yeah. And then the wide receiver room is just kind of weird. Will Pauling, maybe he's hurt, maybe he's not. He got removed from the Purdue game, seeing reports that he has a high ankle sprain and he'll miss 2 to 3 weeks. Seeing other reports that he's practicing, and I haven't really seen anything that he's on track to play, but nice thing about the Big Ten, we'll get an injury report a couple hours before this game kicks off. So, we have that. And then Bryson Green got removed from the game last week too. So really, really undetermined, but Tretch Kahuna had a huge game last week. 3,900 is too cheap. If Green and Pauling are both out, Anthony and Williams are going to be on the field too. So you're seeing some real cheap wide receivers that are going to help you pay up for some of those running backs if you want to, and quarterbacks, honestly. We'll get to a couple more of those later too. And then on the Rutgers side, one of the expensive running backs I just mentioned, Monangai, he's the dude. All of the usage goes to him. The offense runs through him. He's going to get anywhere from 17 to 25, maybe even 30 carries. Honestly, depending on how this game goes, 30 carries is not out of the realm of possibility. So he's always in play. This wide receiver room, another odd one, but for different reasons. Miller was the number 1 wide receiver, very demure. But he's still there, obviously. Chris Long had the most targets last game, but then KJ Duff actually came out of nowhere, ran 36 routes last week and had 6 targets. So it legitimately could be any one of these guys. You're kind of spinning the wheel. So don't love that, but Monangai, again, always in play. He who shall not be named, former Gopher up top of the quarterback, is just, I don't think he's a good quarterback, but we'll just move on to the next game. We don't need to get into that. Texas at Oklahoma. Hey, we got the Red River rivalry. Quinn Ewers expected to return. Oklahoma actually has a good defense. I know it's a 14.5-point spread, but their defense is pretty good. But this game, the Red River Shootout lives up to its name. It seems to shoot out more often than it doesn't. Ewers in his first game back, I don't know. I feel like they'll lean on the run game a little bit more. And at 9,900, Quinn Ewers, again, 250 yards, 2 touchdowns might be all he needs to do. And that's not even close to that 9,900 price tag. So, if you're stacking this game for whatever reason, good luck. But he might make your pool then. Jaden Blue, he's in a timeshare, but he is RB1. And if Texas decides they're going to use him, they're going to use him. So 7,500 is not too much to pay. It's just a matter of where he falls with the rest of the running backs. Personally, I don't mind the Wisner and Gibson value, just because those guys are going to most likely see the field too, especially Wisner, especially when everybody's healthy. Everybody's healthy in this game. They had the bye week. We had been dealing with injuries in this running back room. With everybody healthy, I think it's Blue into Wisner, and then Gibson will pick up the scraps. Gardner's out. He's just, everything's going to these top 3 running backs. He's just hanging out here at the bottom. In the wide receiver room, it's Bond into Golden into Helm. Helm's a tight end. Ryan Wingle's a freshman. Had a flash in the pan for a minute. A little bit of a down game against Mississippi State, but that doesn't mean he's not there. It's his first Red River rivalry game. Too many R's. But it's Bond and Golden. Bond, Golden, and Helm all got targets when Ewers was in. Wingo seemed to get a few more targets with Manning, but that could also be because Wingo just needed a couple of games to get under his belt. Not looking too much into that, but I don't mind any of these receivers. They're all cheap enough, and they all have the upside. Like anybody on this Texas side has the upside to get there other than maybe Quinn Ewers. On the Oklahoma side, Michael Hawkins, just a tad too expensive. He hasn't really proven it yet. He does have the rushing upside, so he's got that going for him. He will run a little bit. In his backfield, Joe Barnes, Taylor Tatum. Tatum's back. He should be back and playing. He's not on the injury report. So we should be good to go there, and they're cheap. It's just a really tough matchup. Even at home, it's a tough matchup for running backs. In the wide receiver room, I'm just going to list the guys that are out. Jaden Gibson, Jaleel Farouk, Nick Anderson, Angelo Anthony, Deon Burks, Cade McIntyre. All right. So that leaves Bauer Sharp, Brennan Thompson, 2 Zions, and again, cheap, and Bauer Sharp, fine. He's cheap enough that you could look at it, especially if you really wanted to run back this Texas stack with somebody and predict a shootout. Bauer Sharp and Brennan Thompson are the worst options. But with an implied team total of 17.5, it's just hard to pull the trigger. Yeah, better for shootout trigger. All right, moving on to a much better game environment. Cincinnati at UCF, just a 3.5 point spread, very high team total. On the Cincinnati side, we got Brennan Sorsby, who's just kind of been a dude this year. He's probably too cheap, given the fact that he's got a high floor and a high ceiling. And he hasn't been hurt too much by sacks this year. Knock on wood. But it's good. He's in a decent spot. And the trailing road team might throw a little bit more. Corey Kiner, Evan Pryor, both expected to be back. Satterfield said that basically everybody's healthy. And Kiner, he specifically mentioned, should be good to go. He's too cheap. And then in this wide receiver room, Henderson, still a top target. Joe Royer, 3,400 is laughable. He's a tight end that just gets all of the looks that Henderson doesn't get, basically. So he is going to have another value guy that can just help you get the more expensive quarterbacks and running backs in. So I don't mind a Cincinnati stack at all. I don't mind a one-off if you're just going to go Henderson or Royer or Kiner or Sorsby. Like, they're all fair. And they're all solid options. On the UCF side, this team's a mess. Xavier Townsend left. They had 2 bad losses in a row. KJ Jefferson at 8,900. I don't understand why they keep him up here. I know he's had some decent games, like solid, but he's like 8,900. If you want a 3X, you think KJ Jefferson is going to get you 27 points. I just don't see it. Maybe he will. You know what? Now that I said it, he will. Mark my words. I promise. RJ Harvey, very expensive, but the offense runs through him. It's still his offense. He could easily, I see him getting to 3X at 92 before I see KJ getting to it at 89. And they probably could just run the ball with Jefferson, Harvey, and Boone. Wide receiver room, Kobe Hudson, still the top guy. Randy Pittman is getting a few more looks at tight end, and he's cheap. Javarius Johnson got the start with no Townsend, but Johnson and Whittemore are going to split. And then, again, if you want to stack this, it's hard because it's a 31.5 point team total, and you want to stack this game somehow. It's just either the guys are expensive or who knows. It's a little bit weird. If you want to just do a Cincinnati stack with a Harvey run back, that sounds like it's good enough to me to get exposure to this game, especially because it's a lot easier to get exposure to this next game. I shouldn't say easier because there are a couple of expensive guys. California at Pittsburgh, a 3-point spread. California with a 28.5 point team total. Fernando Mendoza, just too cheap. He's just too cheap. 6,400 is too cheap for him. I know he hasn't had the running that he has in years like last year. We're not seeing the whoopsie daisy Fernando Mendoza, but the upside is still there. He did run a little bit better last game. The thing that concerns me about Cal, though, is that they just got their heart ripped out by Miami. and it was one of the last games on the slate, maybe the very last game on the slate last weekend. And now they have to travel across 3 time zones to an undefeated Pittsburgh team. So it's just going to be tough for them. Jaden Ott, I don't know. He had 7 carries for 2 yards last week. He had a rushing touchdown, but he had the big passing, receiving touchdown too. And he looked good. It was a screen that he ran, or a short pass that he ran. He looked good running. So I think he's healthy. And this could be a game where they just start to rely on him and feed him more, especially because, I mean, he only had 7 carries last week, so he should be somewhat fresh. But Javian Thomas is still going to be involved. So that's the biggest thing. But teams have run on Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a team that's like, we're just going to score as many points as we can. Good luck keeping up with it. It's like the Roadrunner and the Coyote on Looney Tunes. Just to this point, the anvil has fallen on the opponent every single game. Pittsburgh's undefeated. Wide receiver room, still like Merriweather's still not going to play. Basically, everybody who's been out all season is still out. Isaiah Hunter is wide receiver 1. Corey Dyches, the Maryland tight end transfer, has seen a little bit of increased usage lately. 3,100s, again, a nice price tag. So there's a lot of these cheaper wide receiver tight ends that are kind of catching my eye a little bit. But you're not really focused on wide receivers a ton for Cal, more the quarterback, maybe Ott if you're feeling risky, if you want to catch him before he blows up. And then on the Pittsburgh side, Holstein and Reed are just the 2 guys. I don't care if they're 10K. I'm still going to try to find a way to get them in. Reed is like this year's Ollie Gordon was last year. It's just how it is. Hammond got a little bit of field time last week, but didn't take too much. Again, at 3K, throw a dart if you're mass multi-entering 150 lineups. Don't hate Hammond. And then the wide receiver room, take your pick again. I thought Sincere Lee just had a big game because they were playing a bad team. Now, he caught a touchdown last week. He's still involved. Kenny Johnson's still too cheap. Raphael Williams still playing almost 95% of the snaps at 4,400. Still getting the targets. Mumfield's still number 1, too cheap for a number 1 wide receiver in this offense. On it, like stack Holstein, Reed, and a wide receiver if you want to. Run it back with Fernando Mendoza. And I don't mind that at all. This is a game that you're going to want exposure to. And these teams, like I said, Cal is probably more set up for a letdown after last week plus a travel. But, I mean, they're a team that can score points too. So this is a solid stack. Louisville, Virginia, 7-point spread. Louisville on the road. So this is a game that, could get a little bit sneakier. It's still within a touchdown, but it's not going to catch the attention like the last game we talked about. Tyler Shuck, they priced him up. Hey, only like $400 or $500 or something, but they priced him up. And now he's at a point where he's all right. He's all right. So it's fine. Like, he's a solid player, decent price. If you want to get he's almost guaranteed to get you like 20 to 23 points. Like, if that's what you're comfortable with, go ahead and play Shuck. Isaac Brown and Donald Chaney have been splitting, but Brown has just been more effective. So, I mean, I lean that way. He's a little bit more expensive, but they're 2 cheap running backs who are going to see the field quite a bit. And then we need to talk about Colin Lacey. I think you guys know. Everybody probably knows Colin Lacey last week, the lockiest of locks. And he dudded. It just happens. It just happens sometimes. He's only 3,900, so his price stayed low because of it. He's still going to be on the field. He's still going to get targets. I still love the play. I'm not going to back off because of one bad week. It's just part of the process. Ja'Cory Brooks, still a number 1 guy. He had the big touchdown catch early, and I think he ended up with 2 touchdown catches. That kind of skewed his numbers. He only had 3 catches overall, I'm pretty sure. And Amari Huggins, Bruce. Oh, man. Amanda Huggins, just hear me out on this. Yes, he had maybe his best game of the season. He finally showed up. 5 catches on 6 targets, 7 total snaps. That does not seem sustainable unless they're going to give him more snaps. That's something I believe when I see. But it's those top 2 guys for Louisville that you're looking at in the wide receiver room. On the Virginia side, Calandria is priced down. Awesome. But here's something about Louisville. Tyler Huff for Jacksonville State, 18 rushes for 101 and a touchdown. Haynes King, Georgia Tech, 14, 51 and 1. Riley Leonard, Notre Dame, 13, 52 and 1. Kevin Jennings, SMU last week, 10 for 113 and 1. All of those four guys, what they have in common is they're all quarterbacks. They also led their team in rushing. They also scored a touchdown, all against Louisville. This might be the Calandria breakout game. I'm not telling you to take out a second mortgage on your house and spend it all on Calandria, but I'm just giving you the data that we have in front of us. that tells us that, yes, Louisville has a decent run defense, but for some reason they struggle with rushing quarterbacks. Virginia at home makes me like that even more. Kobe Pace and Xavier Brown, again, tougher matchups for them, but Pace kind of took that lead back role over a little bit more last week, and he's still cheap. And then Malachi Fields, still a top wide receiver, just a little bit expensive. Trell Harris, we don't know if he's going to be back after missing the last couple of weeks. Trell Harris, and I think Chris Tyree's already out. I'll double check on that, but I think he's already out, and obviously do your research. But J.R. Wilson, even though he didn't start last game, it was his first game of the year. He had 6 targets. So he's a guy that you might look at for minimum price if you're stacking this game, especially. Cameron Courtney got the start for Tyree, and Andre Green got the start for Trell Harris. But again, it was Wilson that emerged. So, don't mind including J.R. Wilson in a stack, especially if you think Virginia's going to have to throw a little more playing from behind. Stanford, Notre Dame. Ashton Daniels expected back. Micah Ford was hurt, but he's expected back. It's a tough spot. Notre Dame at home. It's a bad matchup for everyone. Yes, they're cheap, so you're taking a flyer on any of these guys. Elik Iomanor is probably still going to get his targets, but 5,700 with the wide receiver value. If you want to pay up else, again, I feel like a broken record. You've heard it enough. If you want to pay up for RBs, you got to pay down at wide receiver. Iomanor, it's a tough matchup. It's just hard. So I don't really love a lot from Stanford. Never love an 11-point team total. Notre Dame side, Riley Leonard, 8K is a little bit laughable. I don't know if he can throw the ball very well, but he runs like a running back. And he gets to touch the ball first on almost every play after the center snaps it. So, I like his upside. Jeremiah Love has great upside. And Jadarian Price, that price tag is what is very intriguing for me. He fumbled at the beginning of the last game, but Freeman said he has all the confidence in the world in Price. Said it's not going to have any impact moving forward. Said expect big things from him this game, whatever that means. But at 3,400, don't mind that flyer either. But love at 6,100, probably still not expensive enough for this matchup. And then flip a coin with this wide receiver room. Honestly, all of these wide receivers could be the guy. And Faison, who's not even on this list, could be the guy. So there's too many options. Stack the Notre Dame side with Leonard and Love and or Price and maybe a wide receiver if you want to. Any combination of those guys. Obviously not all 4 of them. That must be real crazy. But not looking at much from the Stanford side. Penn State at USC. The opposite of the Pittsburgh-Cal game. Now Penn State has to travel the other direction. But they're going to get a couple extra hours. So it's a little bit different. Still have to travel 3 time zones. Nicholas Singleton warmed up last week, was in uniform, was announced as a starter in the stadium, didn't play a snap. We later found out it was due to an illness, so hopefully he's back and good to go. 7K is not too much for him in this matchup. Katron Allen might be priced up a little bit too much, a little bit of knee jerk from Singleton being out. Allen got a lot of the usage. Aller, just a guy. He's just a guy. 7,800 is not an intriguing price tag by any means. But Tyler Warren at 5,300, this could be the cheapest we see him all season. It's Aller's favorite target. So this is a target play. Penn State is on the road. So if USC can get up early and forces Penn State to throw, Warren's going to be the guy. Wallace still has the upside. After that, it's tough in that wide receiver room. On the USC side, Miller Moss, just a guy at 7,500. I don't know that I love it. I don't hate it. I just don't know that I love it. They might need to throw a lot as well if they get behind first. It's whoever gets behind first maybe has to throw a little bit more. Woody Marks did finally have a ceiling game, but now he's priced up. He's priced like he had a ceiling game. So 7,900, just a little bit harder to pull the trigger. But he could be in for a solid day. He's involved in the pass game too. So I don't hate it. Don't love it. Don't hate it. And then wide receivers, again, it's so spread out. One game it's Lane, one game it's Hudson, one game it's Branch. Mekhi Lemon was back last game and had a couple of catches, and now McCree is expected back. So there's too many cooks in the kitchen. Deuce Robinson, like last week, I loved Lane and Deuce Robinson, and it ended up being a Hudson game. And I know Deuce Robinson had the touchdown in a losing effort. I will remind you, in case you don't remember who they played, Sky Umago Gophers. But USC coming off a tough loss on the road. They go back home. They're going to come out firing. So don't mind this as a sneaky game stack. It's just a matter of how you want to do it. And it's kind of a roulette wheel in both wide receiver rooms. And then a late night hammer, not the greatest late night hammer, but not the worst. Solid totals, Arizona, BYU. Noah Fafita does not look like he did last year. He's 6,500 is cheap. That's the one thing I will say. This is a stackable game, but it's gonna be odd because the Arizona side is odd. Fafita, he's cheap. Quali Conley is expensive, but he's gonna get most of the usage, so I don't mind him. And then Tet McMillan is he's very expensive, so you can fit him in. Honestly, he works better in a Fafita stack because of how cheap Fafita is. But Tet McMillan, he's the target monster. 60-point upside. It's legitimately there. It's not. I don't think I would bank on it, but of anybody on this slate, especially wide receivers, to get to 60 points, Tet McMillan might be the guy. It's just it's hard to pay that price tag. Other than GPPs and game stacks. So Fafita, Conley, and McMillan are the guys I'm looking at there. On the other side, Retzlaff, solid. 7,400 is not too expensive. It's not super cheap, but I mean, I like Retzlaff. He's kind of on an every other game sort of track. And if you follow that, if you believe in that at all, this would be a down game. But his down games were against Kansas State and SMU, so you can't really fault him. Those are two tougher defenses. But he's fine at 7,400. This wide receiver room, there are literally 6 guys listed on the depth chart that it could be or. LJ Martin is kind of where we're leaning because he's expected to be back and he has the credibility from last year. He was a stud. But it's hard to mess with until, and the tough thing about this too is that it's a late game hammer. So it doesn't start until, 4 hours after the first set of games does. It starts even later than the rest of the afternoon games. But in this wide receiver room, Darius Lassiter, he missed a game, but he still leads the team in targets. At 4,200 is too cheap for a wide receiver one with that sort of upside. And Chase Roberts isn't too much more expensive. He's going to be involved as well. And then the rest of these guys that are sub 4K are going to be on the field and involved. So this is a stackable game. It's going to be hard to figure out what's going to happen with this running back room, especially since it's the very last game. But I mean, it's a solid game to stack. So I don't mind it at all. But that is the last game of the main slate. And this is a blank stone. In case you haven't seen the colored one, here's the colored one from last week. I wanted to remind you all of the Marcel Reed, Connor Wegman situation because we all had a lot of fun. And I love that, going up to lock and not knowing and getting that late breaking news. But what I really want to show you is what the stone includes. It's everything you need to know right in one place. You have the players by position, their projections, the percentage of ownership. Is their defense good? Do they have a good matchup? Are they a run team? Are they a pass team? How many snaps have they been on the field this year? How many targets per game do they get? How many rushing attempts per game do they get? So it shows you everything you need to know. Usage, time on the field, projections, game script. We have, if it's a target game, a sneaky game, a blowout, or just this was a nothing game last week that turned into a blowout. Obviously, we can't predict the future. Who thought Texas A&M was going to beat them that badly? But if you want to see a colored stone all the time, just sign up for SHIPIT Nation. Look, we have everything, every sport with tools, rankings. And college football isn't the only stone. We have it for NFL. We have stones for NHL. We have stones for MLB. And guess what? All of those sports are going on right now. So, this is a time to get all access. It's not too expensive. It's $700 for the entire year because we want you to pay for your contests, not your content. But like I said, we have MMA still going. We have college football and NFL. We have swing season golf, which we still do shows every week. And if you just want to try one of the sports, you have a favorite one that you want to try, we have those packages too. And you can get it with or without an optimizer. It's your preference. We want to be able to customize it as much as we can for you and not break your bank. And oh, by the way, football is not just NFL or college football. You get both for one price. So that's pretty awesome. And why do you want to join the community? Because we have flags flying at the top of contests week after week after week. Big $10,000 hit this week. We had a $25,000 hit this week. Lots of first place, lots of second place, a lot of top 10s in the community. The greatest community I've ever been a part of. And it gets you access to the Discord where even beyond the content, we have conversations and talk about game theory and DFS and why we're doing it a certain way, or maybe some breaking news happens and you don't see it. You know, where you're going to see it is in the Discord. So join us at SHIPIT Nation. We're ready to have you. But always remember, rule number one, college football is fun. Just enjoy the process of building your lineups. Enjoy watching the college football. Enjoy watching your lineups skyrocket to the top. And I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching.